Hey everyone, welcome back to the Masters in Travel podcast. This episode came from something I've been working on internally with my team. This is Brianna, by the way. So I have been trying to take what's in my head after years of designing trips and actually put language to it. Not just like the process I do and my workflows, but the thinking underneath it. And I think this is such an important part of what we do when we try and transfer our knowledge or our point of view that isn't always easy to explain or create an SOP off of, right? Because what I've realized is that the hardest part of our job to teach isn't the logistics and it's not the systems. It's not even the destination knowledge. All of those things are pretty easily learned or taught, right? But it's our judgment. And our judgment is different from one advisor to the next. It's also one of the things that makes us unique, but it's so intuitive to who we are that sometimes it can be hard to teach that to another person. And I have found that there's so much to my business and my brand that is because of how I make decisions, that there isn't one clear answer or one right way to teach someone and then they just quote unquote get it for life, right? So as I was working through this, I also had the thought, I didn't learn this anywhere either. Like nobody taught me. I came out into this industry from a totally different career and industry. And so a lot of my learning came from trial and error. And I realized that after the fact that if something didn't quite land, there was a reason for it. Even on paper, it might have looked great. So I wanted to walk you through a few of the frameworks I use now when I'm designing trips and the way that I have learned to try and teach the people on my team so that they are really fluent in the way that Milk and Honey Travels designs trips and that they can also learn and grow with the business and the brand in a way that is helpful from start to finish. So I'm going to walk you through those frameworks. And I feel like if you're building a team yourself, this is a kind of thinking you're trying to get out of your head and into someone else's work. I talk to a lot of advisors at this stage of business, and I know this to be true. But also, if you're earlier on in your career, this is the muscle that you're building right now. This is what takes time. And I'm hoping to just kind of accelerate that process by giving you a way in which to think and quantify what you do, why you do, how you do it. So it's not going to be about what hotels to book or what tours to include, all that kind of stuff, right? It's literally going to be the frameworks I use and how to think through a trip and think through my relationship with my clients that actually makes their trips feel good when your client is actually in it. So let's get to it. I'm hoping this is helpful. I had the idea to record this podcast literally after I kind of wrote all these frameworks out. And so tell me if you find this helpful or not. Framework number 1 is reading the client, not the list. So my thought behind this core idea is that clients don't need more options. They need clarity. And a lot of times, I think, especially earlier on in your career, we can tend to think and treat everything on the form that they fill out equally, right? So we're trying to cover all of our bases and we are doing a lot of checklists instead of guiding. And I want the shift to become, what are we listening for? And where is our opportunity to actually be an advisor, a consultant, to guide them to the best decision or the best direction even. So if you do use an intake form for the type of trips that you do, that form is great for showing you the options. But when you get on a call with somebody and when you have the conversation, that is going to show you the answer. And you have to go into the call with that understanding and belief. So for my clients, oftentimes the destination can be up in the air, so to speak. We might want this, but we might want that. Our honeymoon could be great in Bora Bora, or we could go to Africa. This is literally a recent trip request that I got and a client call that I got on. In their intake form, they said Africa, they said Bora Bora, or maybe just Hawaii. And I'm like, pause. Like, what in the world is the same about a trip to Africa and Bora Bora? Like, can you get any more different, right? But in their mind, it's just kind of like, we want a romantic honeymoon, and Bora Bora, Africa makes sense to me, like a little bit like unique, like big. I don't know where Hawaii came from, but this is the opportunity to understand, okay, I am going into this call with not trying to talk about every possible honeymoon destination there is, and also not trying to tell them that like these are we'll equally explore both of them. They're equally, no, I want to guide them to the best decision for them and really align based on my expertise and knowledge the right choice, right? So the key is not to I'm not trying to validate every possible opportunity and every possible trip decision. I'm trying to help them feel confident choosing the right thing. So the list that they give me is a starting point, and I I read through the form. I kind of try and pick out, okay, what are they saying? Why are they saying it? All of those things. But when I'm getting on the call, it's to find an answer and to help guide them into the right answer. Now, how do I do that? Well, a lot of times what you'll find is when people in a form or even on a call give you like, we're thinking about France, but maybe Italy, and hey, I don't know, maybe Croatia could be cool. And all of those could be great trips. But normally there is one that they kind of keep coming back to or sound a little bit more excited about or get more amped when they're talking about that particular option versus that particular option. And there is an opportunity for us to pay attention to that. Like maybe the reason for multiple ideas is, I don't know, it could come from anything, but there is something that gets them most alive. Pay attention to that and understand that what they're actually looking for a lot of the time is a validation in their own opinions and thoughts, not necessarily us being equally excited about everything that they've brought to the table. So understand that this is our job to see, hey, where are they most alive? What do they get most excited about? Like they've given me these multiple options, but there is actually the one option that I am getting the, bells on. The other thing is ascertaining what actually fits best, right? So there is going to be an opportunity for us to actually advise when we understand that what they're asking for doesn't actually fit the experience that they're hoping for. So I had this happen once where a client asked me for the Maldives, and then while we're on the call, I realized he doesn't know how to swim. Why would you want to be in an overwater bungalow where the majority of your time is going to be in the water when you are not a person that likes being in the water? You heard that the Maldives is a great honeymoon destination, but that does not fit the experience that you would enjoy at all. So back to we could do Africa, we could do Bora Bora, blah, 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 blah. Same kind of thing, right? I heard that he was active. He wanted to relax. He wanted the opportunity to relax on his honeymoon, but he wanted to do things, and he didn't just want a beach trip. So Bora Bora and even Hawaii just wasn't kind of rising to the top for me. And Africa delivers on uniqueness, adventure, top tier hotels, all the other things that they said was important. And so while their form listed 3 different options, I could tell through the call what they actually wanted. And I validated that and gave confidence to that decision so that we both felt good about it. So that's the framework number 1. Read the client, not the list. And by list, I mean the form that they fill out, and sometimes filtering into the things that they're saying on the call. We are trying to read what's underneath that and not just what's on the surface. Okay. The second framework is thinking through movement first, experience second, suppliers third. This is kind of how I'm trying to explain to my team. And again, this might not apply to you. It might not actually be what you agree with in terms of your approach to trip planning, or it might not be applicable to the types of trips you plan. I, as you're probably aware, do mostly custom FITs. And so if you're not doing this type of trip planning, this one might not be as applicable, or you might just have a different approach and a different opinion. Also fair. But in my business, and when I think through trips, I want to have the shape of a trip understood on my end before I go to a DMC. Why? Well, there is a part of how I do trip design that is very dependent on the pace of a trip, how it feels, how it moves from start to finish, that I find really important and really valuable. And it's one of the things that I kind of like hang my hat on. So if I let a DMC 10 times out of 10 determine that, because I'm just, hey, taking all the information, throwing it at them, saying, tell me what you got, then they are doing that work. And so sometimes, to a degree, I feel like the DMC's job is, yes, to help me with their deeper level of understanding and expertise, but to fill in the logistics and recommend the right tours and pacing based on what I've given them, right? They're more so helping me execute the architecture that I've already loosely outlined. And so if I hand them what can seem to be a blank brief, that's when I feel I get back a generic itinerary. And it's kind of built around what they sell well, or what they push towards. This is not all DMCs, but I'm generalizing here. So what I like to do is think through that stuff first and really have a sense and an understanding of like, okay, what works logistically for what they're asking for, what makes sense with any kind of budget constraints or time of year or something like that. Where is the emotional arc of the trip that I can share with my DMC or partner that I'm working with, right? So I'm not focusing on a specific tour or even maybe a specific hotel, unless it is a hotel forward design. I am going into the trip, designing it intentionally, and that requires me giving some thought and understanding for what I'm going to share and where I think the architecture of the trip should start. Now, this was to give you an example of how this looks kind of in real life. I had a recent trip, and again, it started with my first framework of like, we could do these, couple of destinations, and I had to think through logistically what actually makes sense here, because there were multiple countries, and that was also going to determine what supplier or DMC I worked out through. But I also had to say, hey, what do I know and understand about these clients, and what in my gut is telling me is the best direction for this trip? So I thought through, hey, they wanted a water aspect, either lake, ocean, what have you. And so where's that going to fit in? They are adding on from a work trip. So they're starting here in Switzerland, but they have actually no interest in really exploring Switzerland. They really want to get to Italy. So what is the quickest and most efficient, logical way to make that happen and then design a Italian heavy itinerary versus starting them in Switzerland because they are in Switzerland when that doesn't excite them as most. So I'm thinking through all of these things, and I'm understanding the movement of the trip, the experiences I want to layer in. And once I have that understanding, then I go to a DMC with my picture in my mind and ask them to help bringing this trip to life, right? So I'm not starting with anything else but that big picture and what I like to call the architecture of a trip. So understand the order in which you think of trip design, because that has so much to do with the outcome and what you get back from your suppliers and how everything connects on the ground. I could have went to a Switzerland DMC and said, hey, these clients are going to be in Geneva. We want XYZ, da 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 da. But that wasn't the emotional pull of the trip they were looking for. And it was up to me to uncover that, but also give some thought on how could this logistically happen, and then find the partner after I had done all of that work. So that's my framework number 2. It's not going to apply to everybody, but I do think it's important, if you value the input that you bring to a trip design and the way that you think through travel, if that is part of your brand identity, then this is an important framework to understand and then be able to share with either your team, if you have one, or to just kind of like exercise that muscle within your own process to get stronger at what you are sharing with a partner, a DMC, what have you, as they help you build your trips. All right. So number 3 framework is show them where the money goes. Now, this is all about budget reality and pushback, right? Which I know the majority of us deal with this in some capacity. If you are never dealing with budget issues, budget questions, and having the budget not align with the trip that you hear them describing, then you can kind of fast forward this point and it doesn't apply to you. But I think that a lot of us do have to manage expectations and really understand, hey, what about the budget conversation needs to happen so that we can drive and get to better decisions. I believe that budget clarity drives better decisions. And so in my mind, it is sometimes imperative when I see a mismatch to explain to them and have a conversation, not in a way that's like, whoa, that budget doesn't work, but explain to them, hey, here's what the reality is. And here's, if we design in this way, I'm going to show you and talk through some specifics because I want to make sure that I understand what matters most to you, where you are willing to do some trade-offs, and how we can end up at a trip that really, really excites you, but that respects the type of travel that I plan and where we can make this budget work, right? There is a tendency, and I will speak for myself, when I was newer at this, to shy away from these conversations, to not address them head on, to not really know how to talk about it. Well, they told me that they had $10,000, and so I will move heaven and earth to take this $10,000 and make it fit whatever, trip they have outlined for me, like no matter what. And I will pull out my hair and I will do all the things and I will ask 5 different DMCs to give me a quote to see if it could get no, there is a way in which we can understand how a budget shapes a trip, and that understanding will make sure that we're not having the conversation too late or too gently without specifics, because it actually determines the outcome. So the goal isn't talking our clients out of their dream trip necessarily, but it is sometimes important to show them the math clearly enough so that they can make real decisions and understand clearly where we're headed. I put this framework in place because if I am teaching and showing other people on my team why this matters, I want them to recognize the importance of this before we get to the proposal, building the proposal stage, before we're coming back with a proposal that's either far over budget or far misaligned from the trip that they said they wanted. I don't want either of those to happen. So the conversation needs to happen early, and it needs to feel positive. Let's just say that. So the mistake that you can make in this stage without having this framework in place is to build first and address the budget later. And that can create a lot of friction and disappointment. So sometimes this kind of came up. I was trying to think of examples for all these frameworks. So this framework came up recently with a honeymoon trip to France. And the budget on its own looked healthy. It was 20 to 25K. But the constraint they had is we want to fly business class. Well, we're coming from San Francisco, we want to be on United in Polaris, whatever. Okay. Well, all of a sudden you've taken a budget that you are comfortable with, an overall budget, right? And you've cut it in half, right? Because right now for your dates and the way fuel prices are, these business class flights are almost $7K per person, which gives me $14K out of a $25K budget, pretty much not enough to work with on the ground, right? So the thing that I do is always separate land from flights. And then if in their mind, they have an overall amount they're trying to spend, I'll take that into consideration, because then I can show them, hey, your flights are going to be $14,000. I cannot deliver on a honeymoon at the level of hotels you're saying you want to experience, the length of time you're saying you want to be in France with what's left over, and still come in at 25K or under. It's impossible, right? It's not impossible. It's impossible for what they're asking for. Let me just be clear on that. So I'm not pushing back. I'm trying to respect what they're able to and willing to pay, but I need to clarify. And so my job is to advocate for the trip that they actually want, not to close the booking at any cost or to get them to kind of just sign on the dotted line and we'll just deal with it later. And so sometimes in this case specifically, the decision that we came to was that we're going to push out the trip. The business class flights were that important of part of the experience was that important to them that they did not want to settle for premium economy or anything like that. And so when I showed them, hey, if we do premium economy, here's how the trip could look. If we did economy, y'all are living large. But that was not okay for them. And so now instead of traveling in the beginning of October, we're traveling the following May. But we had to get to that and come to that understanding. And the framework for me sharing how I do this is to really understand that the best decision is having clarity in this conversation, and that will drive better decisions and ultimately end up with people who feel more comfortable and confident with the direction that we're going. Okay, the next framework is that for me and my business, and this might apply to you, so again, take it, try it on for size, is that the client momentum matters more than complete information. Now, I realize that there are plenty of advisors that I respect, advisors that have fabulous, successful businesses that would not agree with this one. However, this is where I land. And so I'm sharing this framework with you because, again, it's something that I have to verbalize and figure out, how do I make other people who are invested in this business and this brand and in our client experience understand why I make these decisions sometimes in the way that I do. So the client momentum mattering more than having complete information is a framework that we use when I am deciding whether or not to wait for a supplier. Now, I know that sometimes people don't think that this is the right call, and they're not going to try and move a trip forward without the full picture and all the information and the breakdown and all that kind of stuff. But I believe in progress over perfection, because client momentum matters more than complete information when the goal is to get a buy-in on a trip experience. Not to say, hey, I'm needing the full details. I'm needing for the DMC to give me all of the tour explanations, and I need to know. No, I say, do I know enough to move forward, to have the client say, this is great, we're on the right track, or this is not really hitting right. And so a lot of times I will build a structure or move forward without complete information so that they have something to react to. Again, this is a framework for my business. And so the reason why I'm sharing it is because you can have a completely different framework, but you need to understand what your framework is and why you make the decisions you do. Because for a point like this, it differs from trip to trip, whether or not I'm saying, great, I know I'm reaching out to this DMC, they reply in 48 hours, I'm good to go, and they have an understanding of the type of trips we plan and really hit the nail on the head. And so I know what I'm going to get back is good enough for me to get a client proposal back to them within, a week's time, what have you. But in the same token, I remember I have a great DMC for Japan, but I was struggling there for a little while. And I remember, I think it was about 2 years ago, I would reach out for a DMC for a trip to Japan, and they would tell me, we'll get you a proposal in 3 weeks. Now, that is unacceptable for the way that I do business and what I am communicating to clients in terms of our process. I don't really ever think it's okay to say, great, I'm planning your trip, I'll have something for you to consider in 3 weeks' time. It's just not how I do business or how I like to work. So that was a real problem. It was a real mismatch in terms of my client experience and how I was able to work with DMCs. I had to give somebody something before 3 weeks. And I wasn't comfortable saying, wait 3 weeks till you even see anything regarding this trip. Sometimes the way that I see it is, again, I have enough information. If I'm booking hotels directly, if I know the framework of a trip that I'm trying to build and a general idea of experiences and costs, what have you, I can give them, hey, it's going to come in between this and this range, and here's the flow that I'm thinking of, and then react to it, because do we need iterations here? Do we need to go in a different direction, what have you? But I'm not waiting all of the time on a supplier when I have things that I can get the momentum moving in a forward direction. So sometimes time is a constraint on this, hey, this needs to happen faster. Sometimes the direction isn't confirmed. So we're still a little bit loosey-goosey with what our direction is. Do I want a full proposal with all the bells and whistles when I still need clients to make basic decisions? Personally, I sometimes feel that that's a waste of time, and it creates a revision cycle that's kind of hard to manage. It doesn't feel good on anybody's part. So if we are in the more basic stage of exploratory, right? We know we want to go to Italy, but this direction could work, or this direction could work, or maybe this direction could work. I don't like asking for multiple revisions when we're at that stage of planning, and sometimes that's where it has to start at. But I want to get buy-in on a strong direction most of the time so I can give a DMC a really clear picture. And then for other trips, the DMC doesn't work for me as a right tool at the beginning. So this could be, or it has been the case a lot of the times, with group trips or villa rentals or something like that, right? The involvement early on kind of creates more friction than it solves. So for me, I find that with groups with a lot of opinions and a lot of, there's a lot of decisions being made, and there's a lot of unknowns. And so that first pass to give me something useful from a partner is, it's a lot of back and forth that I would prefer to do the first pass on my end and then bring in my partner after that. So that is my framework for client momentum matters more than the complete information, because progress is more important than perfection. And then the last framework is the consult is for gathering, not answering, right? I created this framework to, again, help my team understand you are capable of doing successful consults in this business. You are wildly, you're good with people, you know how to close, you know how to sell, but there's a lot of times, and again, something that I experienced earlier on when I was doing this is, do I have the confidence needed? And do I feel like I have all the answers? And what I've realized is you don't have to have all the answers. And sometimes the confidence comes from questions, not answers. So our job on the consult is to gather information. And then what we do with that information is how we answer the questions. How we put together a proposal is going to answer all of the questions that we need it to. So this is important of a framework. It can help you if you're newer and trying to feel confident on your consult calls, just to understand, hey, my job is to be a fabulous listener and also get better at uncovering like the questions underneath the questions and like the feeling underneath the feeling, all of those things. But your biggest thing that you can do is to listen well, right? I feel like it's easy to feel pressure to perform on calls. Let me show them how much I know. Let me show them how much expertise I have. Let me show them any question they throw at me, I'm going to know the answer, and I'm going to have an understanding of the exact cost of what it costs to do this type of trip versus this type of trip at this time of year, all the things. And so we're filling space or wanting to fill the space instead of just thinking and listening. And we're trying to solve problems or create answers in the moment when actually we don't need to do that. So what changed for me as I went on is to understand the goal of a consult is to be a really, really great gatherer of information and to ask questions that allow me to uncover the things that I really think are important. Now, this is also a good thing to keep in mind, this framework, because a lot of times what can also happen is the type of consult you think you're walking into can dramatically shift when you get on the phone. Meaning, this is literally something that happened to me, and I was laughing. The consult call was scheduled, and on their form, it was Alaska during the summer. It was a family of 4, 2 teenage boys, lots of adventure, Alaska partly by cruise and then on land to do all of these things. And admittedly, I am not an Alaska expert. I do not plan a lot of Alaska trips, but I'm like, hey, I think I can figure this out. And I think this is a healthy budget, blah, blah, blah. So I did my due diligence. I researched, the different ships and the different sailing dates and the different options and the different adventure opportunities and how it could work, land first, cruise first, all the things, right? So I walked in prepared for this consult on a summer trip to Alaska. We start the call and she's like, well, things have shifted. It turns out, I was really excited to go to Alaska. My boys said that they weren't really interested. So now we've decided to shift and instead do Italy over festive. Pause. I'm sorry. There is nothing comparable to a summer trip in Alaska, versus festive in Italy. Nothing at all. And so it was just kind of one of those moments where, hey, I'm pivoting in the moment. And admittedly, it's not always that stark, but sometimes it is. And so you really have to understand that preparation matters. You should prepare. You should go in with hey, here's how I want the call to flow. Here's the things that I feel like I need to uncover. Here's what I want them to understand. And here's the decisions and the trade-offs we need to make. All of those things, which I normally do for every consult call. But this, when it pivots or when something shows up that you are not necessarily prepared for, the pivot skill isn't to know about every destination and to just have all the things right at your fingertip. Although, yes, I know a lot about Italy, so I felt fairly confident there. But it's about, hey, I also know how to buy time, slow the conversation down, and get back to my fundamentals fast. So what are my fundamentals? It's kind of like the basic template that I have that I can walk into any consult. I could not know where you want to go, what you want to do, and talk to anybody and get a sense of what I need to know to create a great trip. So what experiences are you hoping to have? Have you been there before? What drew you to it? What excites you about being in this destination? Something you want to see, things you want to experience. What does your ideal pacing look like? How do you like your days to unfold? How busy do you want to be? Do you want to have every day structured, or do you like downtime? How much downtime? What matters most when it comes to what you stay? What kind of accommodations are you drawn to? Do you need extra amenities? All of these questions that regardless, I can still ask and get a sense of who this person is, how they like to travel, can still come into play when I am now unprepared for the conversation at hand, or if there's just a pivot and I need to do a really good job of listening to the overall sense of who this client is and how they like to travel, and take that information and build from there. Now, yes, will I follow up with some more clarifying questions? Absolutely. Once I get my head wrapped down that we're doing Italy and festive or whatever the pivot is, and oh shoot, I forgot to ask this, or I have to consider this now, because all the things, right? Where do you want to spend New Year's when we're talking about the different all the things that I might not think to ask in the moment, I can now come back to and follow up with clarity, but I'm letting the client talk and I'm doing a great job listening. So the goal here, and what I try and share, is setting up this framework for people on my team, or if I'm sharing this for you and you're newer at getting confident on consult calls, is there's not a necessity to fake expertise. I understand that being an expert and feeling like you have all the answers right at your fingertips does give you a sense of confidence, but you don't need it. So you don't need to commit too early. You can always say, you know what, I'm going to get back to you on that. I love that. I always say that. If I don't have a clear or certain answer, I will get back to you on that. Is fantastic. And use your questions to not only buy yourself time, but just to get clarity. Have them do the heavy lifting on the call. So just know the confidence on a call doesn't come from knowing every answer. It comes from knowing how to ask the right questions. And you don't need to have the answers. You need to know how to get them. And that can come after the call. So pivoting when a call shifts or when you were a little bit unprepared is a framework that I want people to feel comfortable with. And it is something that I try and explain how I do this on a call with my team so that they can start to feel comfortable leading their own consult calls. Because again, y'all have heard me say this time and time again. We are special, but we are not that special. Meaning almost everything we do can be done by somebody else in our business. And it might never be the case, But I think it is very important for you to understand how and why you do things and how to share that information with others if there ever is a time that you want to hand off that skill or that task or that responsibility within your business. So when I look back on these frameworks that I'm starting to put together, and this is an evolving list, right? I started with 5 and I'm like, I got blank spaces because every time something comes up, I'm going to add to this framework spreadsheet, because there are always things that I am making decisions on that don't have black and white SOPs attached to them, that come from my judgment and my thinking and how I approach travel planning. And I want to start to think through examples of, hey, this came up, what did I do and why? How can I talk through this and explain it? So I'm keeping a running sheet. I encourage you to do the same. Yours might be a similar start to mine, totally different. It doesn't matter. When something comes up that you're like, how would I explain this? How would I walk somebody through my thinking? How did I make this judgment call? Start to just capture that thinking process and then see if you can explain it. It will be a very, very helpful tool. So none of it's complicated. None of this is groundbreaking, but it's also not obvious when somebody's new, when they're just starting out, when they're trying to take on your point of view or way of thinking or trip planning if they are on your team. These are the kinds of things you kind of start to notice when you're doing them over and over again, because they're patterns and there's trade-offs. And so small decisions can end up shaping an experience so much. And we have to understand how those small decisions are being made, because even if it's just us making the decisions, this is essentially building our brand identity without us even being aware of it. So start to take notice. If you're newer, this is a muscle you're building. This is something that you're going to kind of learn to pay attention to over time and be like, oh, wow, this is how I do things. This is how I think through things. This is the pattern that I see. And I stand by it 10 toes down, or let me think about that. Either way, you're thinking through it. If you are leading a team, this is the part that becomes the hardest to teach. I'm not showing somebody how to invoice commissions or build a Travify or set up a client profile. But my judgment and the way that I think through things, it is the hardest part to teach, but it matters the most. Because at the end of the day, the trip design that I am responsible for isn't only about this hotel, this tour, this many days. It's how I think. This is what makes me unique. This is my unique value proposition, and yours is yours. And so I hope that this episode resonated in some way. I'd love to hear if any of the frameworks stood out to you, or if something seemed unclear, let me know, and I'm happy to kind of give you a little bit more of my thoughts behind it. But other than that, thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.